It is my honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Bill Talbott from the University of Washington Philosophy Department. Bill did his bachelor's degree at Princeton University and his PhD in philosophy at Harvard University, where he wrote a dissertation on reliabilist epistemology. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of knowledge. It's the study or the theory of knowledge. He teaches courses at the University of Washington in epistemology, philosophy of law, rational choice theory, moral philosophy, and political philosophy. He is the author of 2 books, both published by Oxford University Press. The first is 2 books on human rights, published by Oxford University Press. The first is titled, Which Rights Should Be Universal? And the second is entitled, Human Rights and Human Well-Being. This book, in 2011, won the Korean Human Rights Book Award, after it was translated into Korean, I assume. In the same year, Bill won the Distinguished Teaching Award at the University of Washington. And his topic tonight is how to believe in universal human rights without being a moral imperialist. Join me in welcoming Dr. Bill Talbott.
Hi. They said this is a lecture, okay on this, but you're going to find out this is audience participation philosophy. That's what we're going to do tonight. And that means I'm going to be asking questions, and I need for people to respond. How many people here can raise their right hand? Would you try? Can you raise your left hand? Okay, good. We're all. So everybody's okay then. Good, because I'm going to be asking questions. And the first question I'm going to ask is, how many people believe that there's at least one universal human right? Okay, that's most of the audience. I want you to notice those of you sitting in the front. Okay, but what we're going to be talking about now is we're going to try to figure out what is it that you believe. Because to believe that there's at least one universal human right, you have to believe that's in universality. And what I want to do is I want you to see that it's a puzzle. Philosophy often begins with puzzles. And it's a puzzle. What does it mean to think that there are universal human rights? And so what we're going to do is we're going to explore a number of different possibilities. The question we're going to ask is, how should we understand the universality of human rights? And once we understand how to understand the universality of human rights, then we have a deeper problem, which is, but if you believe in universal human rights, doesn't that make you a moral imperialist? That's what we're going to do. Now, how could human rights be universal? That's what we start with, and there are going to be 4 possibilities that we're going to canvass. One is that they're self-evident. One is that they're declared to be universal by religious authorities. One is that they're based on universal agreement, and one is going to be a kind of moral discovery, which we'll talk about later after we've talked about the other 3. I would be a millionaire if I had $1 for everybody who said that human rights are self-evident. Right? And even today, in other words, we all know that the authors of the Declaration of Independence said that certain rights were self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they have certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, see, this is you yourself, if you think about it, you can tell that can't be true. They weren't self-evident. Now, in order to tell that, first of all, we have to understand, what does self-evident mean? It's a nice fancy word. Anybody? What does self-evident mean? It means, yeah, that at least we'll say, any rational person would recognize it. Right? I like that. That's right. Do you, by the way, before we consider something like rights, would you have any example of something that you would say is self-evident? So it's one that all rational people are going to agree on. Yeah.
I think would be that people have the right to life.
Oh, you're doing rights. Okay, we're going to come to rights later. But we have to start off with some.
Because I believe that
Yeah.
have the right to have abortion.
Yeah, but here's the thing: are all rational people going to agree?
Well,
That's a
I think
tough.
they're immoral.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. But I'm just saying, to understand self-evident, you see, it's more fundamental than that. It's that it's so obvious that no rational person could disagree with it. Do you have an example of something? Mathematics, like 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay. No, we're not doing rights. We're just working on. See, you have to go step by step. You see, some people they're already way ahead of me, and they're on rights, and I'm just on self-evident. You see that? Okay. I'm slow. I'm slow.
Number system, 2 plus 2 wouldn't equal 4.
Oh, but here's the thing. Here's the thing, okay? No matter what the number system is, once you translate 2 into it and once you translate 4 into it, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay? It's really simple. You can translate it into, and I'll show you why that's true. Because I will take 2 chairs here, and I'll take 2 chairs here, and you'll give me the number system, and I'll say, how many chairs is it in that number system? And it'll be 4. It may not be in English. It might be French, you know? Might be German, fear, right? I don't care what they call it.
Isn't that
but
self-evident by definition?
oh, but all I'm saying is that's what self-evident means. You see, self-evident means something so obvious no rational person could disagree with it. Okay, so now I ask you, the words in the Declaration of Independence, which I just quoted, was this self-evident to the authors of the Declaration of Independence? It was self-evident? Yeah, just say, oh, good. Thank you. I'm going to call on you in just a second, okay? If it was self-evident, well, first of all, they may have believed it, but for it to be self-evident, no rational person could disagree with it. Now, let's just travel back in time. See, I'm holding on him by he's going to make a comment in a minute, but he's agreed to hold off until I get there. Travel back in time, and I ask you, when they published this document, suppose, for example, they had written 2 plus 2 equals 4, 4 plus 4 equals 8. Suppose that the Declaration of Mathematics, okay? Everybody would have agreed with it, right? All rational people would agree with it. And so now you're going to tell me when they published this, all rational people just agreed with it. They've regarded it as self-evident and good. But all I'm saying is right now, at least, it was sort of puzzling why the authors would have said it was self-evident, since, does everybody realize this? You know, you will go to lots of lectures and they'll talk about a revolutionary document, right? How many documents are really revolutionary? This one was. You don't go into revolutions on self-evident truths. That means the other people on the other side definitely disagree with you. Okay, but that's just to say, okay, someone, I'll let you, it may be that the authors of the Declaration of Independence were saying, all those people who disagree with us are just irrational. It's self-evident, because all those people who disagree with, but then I say, was it self-evident? Were these words self-evident to the signers of the Declaration of Independence? And then you said what?
There were slaves in the United States.
If there were slaves in the United States, that might be, well, okay, those were more, the people who owned the slaves, they were more irrational people.
Like Thomas Jefferson.
But here's the thing. What about the people who signed the Declaration of Independence? Anybody know how many of them owned slaves? Owned slaves? It was about 2/3. It was about 2/3.
They didn't think of their
Oh, well, here's the funny thing. I'm sure they all called them men. I'm sure they all called them men. Oh, come on. But you're going to say, oh, but actually, no, what they thought of was, they were only talking about a certain category of men when they wrote this, right?
No,
And it was self-evident that there was one category of men that were created equal, had rights, and the others didn't? I agree with you, that's how they read it. But once you start reading it as only applying to certain people, it can't be self-evident. How do you decide which one's the ones? Just a second, hold on, because right now we're just considering their own beliefs. And does everybody see that for 2/3 of them, they definitely did not believe that all men were created equal, and that all men, look, had the right to liberty? Are you kidding me? They owned slaves. Just a second, hold on, hold those thoughts. Because now I have to ask something, and I have to ask something, and I'm going to address this question to the women in the room. Because Often when people write and they use the word man and men, they mean it generically. They mean men and women. And you may think that's a little objectionable or something like that, but if they meant it, then at least women would have been included in these rights. Did they mean men to include women? They definitely didn't, as a matter of fact. John Adams was in Philadelphia. 41 of 57 signers were slaves. Yes, ouch. John Adams was in Philadelphia, and his wife Abigail wrote him a letter. See, back in the days when they had letters, you know, and it's preserved. So we know otherwise it would have been email and been erased long ago. And in the letter, she says, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Could she have done a more non-threatening request? Okay? Does everybody see? This is the least threatening. Just think of us. Did they think of them? As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. That's how John replied. He actually went on, I don't quote it because it's so offensive, but I'm going to give you the gist of what he said. Here's what he said. We have had lots of crazy ideas and no one has suggested that. That's basically what he said. You see, and people, the reason I tell you the story is it's very hard to put yourself into a different time frame, and so why? Because for us, as we sit here and think, we think certain things are self-evident. And the way you find out that they're not self-evident is you find these are intelligent people. And not only were they not self-evident, they thought they were crazy. And so what we can see is that although they claimed them to be self-evident, this was not self-evident. Uh-oh, bad news, because we're looking for universal human rights. And I thought, and as a matter of fact, as they say, I could still take you to the library and show you books where they claim that they're self-evident. But they weren't self-evident. And all we have to do is go back and we can see the story of, it's a hard, long process by which people come to think they're self-evident. I'll tell you, for example, I teach a course on philosophy of human rights. And for my students, see, the people here, you've been alive long enough to see these changes, but they haven't. And so when I ask them, how many people think it's self-evident that women have equal rights to men, they all raise their hand. No, it's not, because didn't you see what it said back there? It said all men are created equal and they have certain inalienable rights. And when Abigail Adams...
Who cares what they said? I don't live by it.
Okay, you're...
But their exact definition of men, what they mean is rich, white, male.
Thank you, okay.
And so,
And is it self...
Men, poor folks are not men.
Now we're starting to get it. Now you started to get it. But here's the thing, you see. Now we're at the point in a lecture where people, first of all, they had the very edifying thought, oh, these are all these self-evident truths. And now we're at the point where, oh man, there's nothing self-evident. As a matter of fact, it's all just a bunch of baloney. And they say, oh, we have rights because they're white male property owners. And then another group comes along and says, we have rights. But actually, what's interesting is that even though they didn't reach the edifying thought that we might have hoped they would have reached, this is still a revolutionary document. It's still a revolutionary idea that all white male property owners are equal because they come from Europe, which is totally hierarchical. And so the first thing is, oh, the disappointment at, oh, they didn't really make what we would think would be obvious connections. But the other thing to notice is, but there's something radical going on. There's something radical. This is a radical transformation to think that it isn't a hierarchical system, with the king at the top who is ordained by God. Yeah, there you go. But what I'm saying is that although, it's sort of like, is the glass half full or half empty, right? Although the first thing you think is the glass is full, and then you find out it's not. But as a matter of fact, this is going to represent important progress. It's going to represent important progress. But it's going to challenge our understanding of human rights, because the authors of the Declaration of Independence thought that in order to be able to claim that it's rational to believe in equality, even for white male property owners, it has to be self-evident. And all we're seeing in, as we do on each of these things, in very brief compass is that wasn't self-evident. And indeed, none of these things is self-evident, because when you look at it, the historical development, it's a very slow development. And the development of human rights is a development where at each stage, and we'll talk about one or two of the stages here tonight, people sit down and they write a document, and they write a human rights document. If it were self-evident, that would only have to happen one time. If it were self-evident, it would be like geometry. Euclid did geometry 2,400 years ago, and they still teach that. If it were self-evident, they would have sat down, written down the rights. These are the ones that are self-evident, and that would have been the end. We could go on and do something else. But you know what happens historically when you look at them? They write down lists, and they're different lists. And things get on the list at one later time that people would have thought was crazy at an earlier time. And we're going to see it happen. So all I'm saying is, you see, people think, oh my gosh, he's making an argument there are no human rights, or it's all a bunch of baloney or something like that. All I'm saying is, they're not self-evident. But it actually takes a little time to get that thought to penetrate, because some of the things, like, I mean, when I say, like, shouldn't women have the same rights as men? We want to live in a world where that seems self-evident, don't we? Okay. Here we are then. And all I'm saying is, almost everybody raised their hands, and they said, yes, I believe in universal human rights. And now I'm saying, if you thought they were universal because they were self-evident, you're not going to raise your hand next time I ask that question, right? Okay. So let's go back. What's the next option? Well, the next option is maybe they're universal because they've been declared to be universal by religious authorities. And the next thing we're going to see when we look at the historical development is almost every right on the list gets established, if it does, even though at one time the religious authorities opposed it. And certainly it's not because they were supporting it. And so, I mean, look, like liberty and slavery. Oh, was the abolitionist movement led by the Pope and other big religious leaders? The Pope had slaves. Oh my gosh. Christopher Columbus took some natives back, from his voyage so that he could show them off and then make them slaves of the court, and they would then, some were given to the Pope too. So how did slavery end? By war and law. It ended actually by opposition and by some religious groups, but it wasn't the religious leaders. It's a process which we'll see over and over and over again of ordinary people. Ordinary people deciding to oppose it. And then, for example, it started in England, and then they actually elected a few leaders in the House of Commons who opposed it. And it became a mass movement. It was a mass movement in England when Abraham Lincoln invited Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, to the White House. She came in. What did he say? Anybody know? I don't remember the exact words, but I know roughly what. Anybody? Yeah. This is a little woman who started a war. How did she start a war? She wrote a book.
People think about slaves in a different way.
How many people here have read Uncle Tom's Cabin? It's always an interesting question for me. It's a very small number. And you know why? Because in the United States, to get anything in the curriculum, historically, it has to go through the South. And they would never agree to it. And so people have the idea that Uncle Tom's Cabin is some sentimental hogwash. But if you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, and by the way, Uncle Tom has gotten slandered, really bad name. If you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, what you can see is people all around the country identified with the slaves.
I think it was first published in the women's magazine as a serial. And I think the women in the country began to identify with the slaves.
Identified with the slaves.
And then they brought it right. Then they brought it into their husbands and families. So it was really.
It was a totally bottom-up movement. That's all I'm saying. But it was, I just want to say, sometimes people say, oh, is he anti-religious? No, I like religious people. I just want you to realize that the religious people often have to bring their leaders along behind them, as we'll see more of. Yes?
Actually, slavery may be illegal, but illegal slavery still exists. And what we have now, in my opinion, is a different form of slavery.
Okay, and we'll come back to whether there's another way of understanding universality on which there's a right against slavery. But all we've seen so far is that you can't say that what makes the rights universal is that any religious leaders have declared them to be universal. Except maybe after the fact. Legalized discrimination in the United States. Larry and I were talking about this earlier. Of course, we know that actually some of the most important opposition to segregation in the South was the black churches. But was there a white church that took a stand against slavery? The equality of women. Well, we've already talked about that. Every major religion has sacred texts that have been used to justify women's inequality. Right? And you know, I mean, like right now, you know, Pope Francis is having a synod on whether or not they will raise the status, not to equality in the Catholic Church, but just raise their status. Democracy. One important right is democratic rights, but there's no major religion that has a sacred text that supports democratic rights.
When taxation became more widespread, early 1900s, was there any protest at that time by the African Americans not being taxed for goods and services they themselves could not make use of?
You mean for segregation, right? Just to sort of set the scene here, guys, we have to really travel back in time. You're, say, a black person, and this is, I mean, in the early 1800s, this is slavery, right? This is not just legalized segregation. But let's go even to the early 1900s, where it's just legalized segregation. And suppose you go down to the courthouse and you say, I object to paying my taxes because of, what's going to happen to you? Okay, just to be realistic here, okay? Be realistic, right? This is the time when the Ku Klux Klan would have been outside your house if you would just question the system. If you go down to the courthouse, they're going to burn down your house, or worse. Is everybody real? That's the reality of life for a black person in the South. Yes?
In the 1960s, I went to register to vote in Virginia, and there was a black man in front of me or behind me. They gave me the stuff I needed. They handed him a blank piece of paper, and he said, "What do I do with this?" And they said, "Figure it out."
Oh, it's yes.
I wanted to register to vote.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
1960.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, look, it was not until 1967 that the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional laws against miscegenation, marriage between the races, right? That was 1967, Loving v. Virginia. And by the way, they had earlier upheld them, right? And just for example, if you'd gone to the courthouse, that they could have said to you, but in Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of legalized segregation. So yeah, the whole system, all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, look.
So the Supreme Court itself was
Have
biased.
another thing. I mean, how many people? Yeah, I mean, see if if we lived in a reasonable world, everyone in the United States, when they're in high school, if not before, would read the Dred Scott decision. How many people here have read the Dred Scott decision? Okay, see, a few more than have read Uncle Tom's Cabin. The Dred Scott decision, this is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It's not some, white Ku Klux Klan member. You tell me, was he a member of the Ku Klux Klan? I don't know. The Dred Scott decision says, no, they're not people. They don't count. They don't have these rights. And that's the world that black people lived in the South. Okay. So again, what we can see is that we recognize that there are all these things that have happened, and ultimately they've led to people having the idea that there are universal human rights. But as everybody, those of you who are keeping track, have you noticed we still don't understand what is it that we mean when we say that they're universal? Because we've now tried two possibilities. They're self-evident, or they're endorsed by, declared to be universal by religious authorities. What's the next one on the list? The next one, often I will say to people, I would be a millionaire if X, right? I would be a millionaire if I had $1 for everyone who's claimed rights to be self-evident, right? And yet, look, here, in a matter of 10 to 15 minutes, we're able to see that can't be right. They're not self-evident. Okay. I would be a multi-millionaire if I had $1 for everyone who said universal rights are universal because of universal agreement. Okay? That's what makes them universal. Okay, so I brought with me here, I can't do it with the pointer, so I have to go switch. I brought with me the text of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because an interesting question I want to ask is, how many people here have ever read the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Okay, good. Okay, so you're going to have to help out, because the others, the text, I can barely read it. I'm going to go down. But the question that I want to ask is there any right in the UN Universal Declaration that all moral and cultural traditions agree are universal human rights? And universal is important because most moral and cultural traditions say some people have rights, but that's not universal. That's what we're familiar with, okay? So is there anyone that says, well, see here they start off with the preamble stuff, and I'm going to read you a little part of it, but Article 3, like you said, look, here's the one, the right to life. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And now I'm just asking, for each right that I read, does every moral and religious and cultural tradition, do the whole world, do they all agree on this as a universal human right? You're saying no, not even, but she said the right to life was self-evident. Not even the right to life, liberty, and security of the person? Why not? Oh, wow, yeah. There are lots of places, not just in Africa. Other examples? Oh, now that's an interesting one, because at least the way this is usually interpreted, the death penalty is, so they could say, well, we believe in the right to life, but if you kill someone, you forfeit it, or something like that. So it's not actually a direct argument against this, but it raises an issue that if we had more time, we could talk about. Yeah?
Well, a lot of places, girls have to be married to whoever their parents want to be married to. They don't have any.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can, when you say, I mean, I said, we could sort of pick each one, like life, liberty, and security of the person. But does everybody see that there are lots of places where people are not thought of as to having liberty rights at all? And there are lots of places where, I mean, see, the thing is, it used to be, when I would teach philosophy of human rights, I would be able to at least put up some where the students wouldn't right away think of exceptions. But you know what they would do now, right, if I raise this? I would say, what about something like ISIS, they would say, where they think that actually Christians should be killed. They actually are not allowing a right to life, liberty, or security at all to very large groups, right? Now, the only hesitation I have about this is that it's really easy to find other groups that you don't like that are this way. And so I always encourage people to say, okay, but can we find things that are closer to home? Yes?
The Jewish religion, it's recently called X. The woman cannot divorce her husband unless she has, just because she wants to or feels that she has God. He can deny her the right to divorce.
Okay, and so that would be,
Still legal in the state
so that would be a kind of inequality. Yes, do you have something? Oh, repeat the question. Oh, okay, good. So the example, this is an example, these are examples of differences in treatment of men and women. But now I'm actually thinking about, where people get killed. Yes?
Okay, so, let's say, you have a person who commits terrible things, tortures people and murders them, and enjoys it, spends lots of time doing it. Does that person have a right to life?
Oh, see, that's a good question. Whether, if they've done that, can you forfeit the right? That's a,
Sometimes I think yes, sometimes I think no.
but there's a middle ground which says they have a right to life which they forfeit when they kill someone else. And so I don't want to
You don't want to get into
parse that too finely because that's a way of how we understand. It could be that they have a right to life. Oh, but look, I mean, here's what I'm thinking. Somebody should have raised, what about the fact, and now that so many young black males get shot for no reason at all? Now, in theory, you'd say, do they have a right to life? Why is it there's no enforcement? Why is it there's no enforcement?
We tortured prisoners, Americans.
Well, that's the next one on the list. Yeah, I mean, you already got down to torture. I was going to say, yeah, what about this? At least everybody agrees that everyone has a right not to be tortured. And again, you could tell me about ISIS or something like that. But we know, and by the way, what we're talking about is not just doing it, but approving of it. That's the key, proving of it. Uh-oh, I am getting discouraged, folks. Right? Because I remember I may not have raised my hand because I assume you probably thought I believe, you already knew I believe. I believe in universal human rights. But now we found out, how do we understand universality? They're not self-evident. They haven't been declared by religious leaders. Oh, but at least everybody agrees on them. As I say, I'd be a multimillionaire. All these people are writing. That's what universality means, agreement. And I think, what world are they living in? What a nice world it would be. You know, it doesn't have to be every person. There might be this person over there who just loves torturing people. But just imagine if every religious and cultural tradition said that's wrong. And they were appalled. And when they found out about it, like, they found out about Abu Ghraib or they found out about, Guantanamo, they said, we've got to shut it down. Did they shut it down? No. Because a lot of people are saying, torture more of them. Now, you see, at this point, do you see I'm really getting discouraged? But here's the thing. What we are going to see is the belief in universal human rights doesn't depend on any of those things on my list. Where's my list again? So now, instead of thinking we understood at the beginning what universality is, we're going to say, okay, let's look and see what's happening when people get to the point of declaring, and maybe they're just declaring rights for white male property owners, but it's part of a really interesting process because it's a process that goes against the moral authorities. It goes against what even can seem self-evident to people. For example, in 1776, what would have seemed self-evident to people in Europe was people are not equal. Okay. What ultimately now we're working it out. We're seeing there's a process of working it out, and one way of being equal is having certain equal rights. That's what's being worked out. But it's not being worked out, it's only being worked out against people who deny it. So it's never based on universal agreement. I mean, maybe in your dreams someday.
There's one universal right which no one would disagree with, the right to die.
I'm not saying that You actually live in a country where most states do not recognize that right? Just so you. But this is a moral question. In other words, if you just say people will die,
Rather death, not the right to die, but death.
but again, it's not a right. Okay, so here we have. These are some of the things that we just rights against slavery, against torture. Okay, but what I'm going to suggest is that we are part of a historical process by which people are getting the idea that there are universal rights, and the process is a very fallible one. And when we look back on it, sometimes we're really embarrassed. Okay, like you look back and you say, oh my gosh, how could they have been so blind? But what you have to realize is at every stage of the process, people will look back and say, how could they be so blind? Do you know what that means? That means 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, how could they have been so blind? But that's the bad news. The bad news is, but the good news is, over time, some of the blindness goes away.
But has it ever gone away in any other society for any length of time?
Oh, let me tell, again, you have to come and talk to me later, but listen, where human rights really have power and influence things is in Europe, not in the United States. Okay? But anyway, come and talk to me later. Yes?
If we look at the right of gays to marry,
Oh,
then
nice
we
ones.
have a really short time period in which we can
See it?
that there's a switch all the way over.
Thank you. Thank you for that example, because that's it. But here's the thing. Many of the people in this room are around my age. You have lived through this change, and you don't even have to have been nearly as old as I am to have gone from a time when it seemed totally crazy that there would be such a right. It's a short period of time, about 25 years, right? Yeah.
And it was based on people saying over and over and over again and showing that it was not correct.
Yeah.
To deny gay people.
Yeah, and so here's an example of a more recent one. That's why you were going to get me up. You got me up to the present. I wanted to get up to the present so we can see the process is still going on. And of course, nobody in this room thinks everybody in the world believes that there's a right to same-sex marriage. No, that's not the way the process works. But it's a total transformation when you look at it. Where it's happened. And what you can see is, and here I predict, when my granddaughter is teaching a philosophy of human rights class 100 years from now, if she asks the students, is it self-evident that everyone should have a right to marry? Do you know what they're going to do? They're going to say yes.
They already do.
Well, okay, that's right. You're right there. But I'm just saying that's the way it goes from being self-evident that it's a crazy idea to being self-evident that it's a right. Yes?
They don't always already do. I have a grandchild who has Down syndrome, and the court has declared that she has not the right to marry or ever have children.
Yeah.
They decided that.
Now you see, this is really interesting because what I want you to get involved, my question is to get you motivated to think about the process. And you all are talking about the things that are happening right now. And so what you can see is all I want to do is give you a little historical perspective. It's been going on now for a few hundred years anyway, right? And it's not going to end tomorrow. There's a lot more work to be done, right? But now I just ask you, suppose you say, oh, at least now some people recognize that there's a human right to marry, right? Some people recognize that. And I ask, is it a universal human right? And you say, do you mean that everyone has the right? Well, you can't say it's a legal right,
No.
but that isn't the idea of a human right, because there are lots of places where people don't have legal rights, and they're the ones that make the strongest appeals to human rights. They claim the human rights, but they don't make the simple mistake of, for example, the Charter 77 movement in Czechoslovakia, right? The Charter 77 movement said the Soviet Union has signed these human rights documents. Why? First, they all signed the documents because they were totally unenforceable. And the Charter 77 movement said, we're going to monitor how well they abide by these rights. That led to finally the liberation of Czechoslovakia, and then the division in the Czech Republic and the Slovak. And it was It was because the idea of human rights is not an idea about what legal rights there are. It's an idea about what legal rights people should have. And people get the idea long before they have the legal rights. That's the historical story. Now, here's the absolutely amazing thing. How do they get the idea? What idea have they gotten? Since it's not the idea that it's self-evident, it's not the idea that the religious authorities just declared it. It's not the idea that everyone agrees. And what I want you to, as you just think about the history, it's a discovery about our common humanity. And it's a discovery, and what's interesting is, it's a discovery actually about what rights people should have over themselves, right? And the main one, the first one is that they should have a voice, that people should listen to them. And you see, even that, right? That we can go back, and slaves are a good example, but actually the position of women 200 years ago is not much different. Well, children are different because we know that parents do have to be paternalistic towards their children. Okay, but at some point you actually get rights to more than just articulating your voice, but also to be respected and listened to, right? And children should grow up in an environment where that is taken for granted. Yeah, so I'm going to include children in the human rights. You're right. Yes?
Even in the medical field, children and the parents of those children have no right saying whether their child gets chemotherapy. If the doctor says he has to have
Well,
the child from the parent.
Well, see, and what I'm going to do is I want to step back from, I think the question of children's rights is really interesting, but it raises issues that are different from when we're talking about adults. So why don't we just focus on adults, because that's challenging enough. And then we could go from there to next week we'll come back and do children. Okay, here's the thing though. Now we're getting the idea that somehow people are getting the idea, and I'll have more to say about it. But then we get a worry. And the worry is, oh, but wait a minute. If you believe in universal human rights, aren't you being a moral imperialist? Aren't human rights a Western idea? So we actually need to take a minute to, is the Western tradition a tradition of human rights? No, right? People are all nodding their heads. The Western tradition is a tradition of opposition to human rights. Examples. Is it a tradition of religious tolerance? Example. I was loving example. Oh, sorry. What? Spanish Inquisition. That's right. The Western tradition is the Spanish Inquisition. Well, let me tell you, those of you who don't know, in Europe for hundreds of years there were wars of religion. And when they study lethality of wars, these are some of the most lethal wars. They didn't kill as many people as in World War II because there weren't as many people around to be killed. But in terms of percentages, they did a really good job. Why? Because the other side is the devil. You don't compromise with the devil, you kill them. That's the Western tradition. The idea of religious tolerance has a long history. Just a second, if you'll just let me. Going back even beyond, but a really important chapter of it is the Emperor Ashoka of India in the 3rd century BC. And you see that religious tolerance, the idea comes when you have religious intolerance. There were lots of wars going on. They were religious wars, and Ashoka had an idea. He said, I know how to solve this problem. We'll just tolerate all religions. Ashoka is still revered as one of the great rulers of India because he had such a prosperous regime. And one of the main ideas was it was religious tolerance. And the reason I mention him is because if people think, well, at least it's a Christian idea, Christ wasn't even alive then. Now, you had your hand up, did you?
What I wanted to say goes back to what you were saying about the devil. But before you said they thought the others were the devil. The problem is thinking of some group as other.
Yeah.
Means that they are no longer human.
That's right. They no longer get the same consideration. You're exactly
That's the
right.
other, and that's a very radical feminist idea.
Oh, well, yeah, you find it in all sorts of areas. That's right. You find it in all sorts of areas. And it really goes back, I mean, just you know, I mean, I don't want to take away
The
from
one or the
radical
other.
feminists, but
First thing between
you got
men
to,
and women.
you know, you should come and talk to me later because I'm going to tell you about the Salamanca school in Spain. It was there. They had the idea too. It was the confronting the natives in the New World, which were regarded as enemies and heathens and so on. And they said, all you're doing is projecting all your fears of these. But what you should recognize is they're human like us. So it goes back. All these ideas go back a long way. We could, for each one of them, we could spend a long time. I don't.
Are we getting to the stage that Republicans, Democrats, same thing? The other side is evil.
Oh, well,
They are.
I mean, you know, you'll find it. I mean, but this is a deep-seated part of human psychology everywhere, right? It's a really, but on the other hand, the only thing I resist is your implication that there aren't Republicans and Democrats who overcome it, right? Of course, good. Okay, is the Western tradition a tradition of democracy? I already sort of gave a hint on this one. Is it a tradition of democracy? No, it's a tradition of hereditary monarchs, absolute monarchs. Okay, question. When Benjamin Franklin was advocating for democracy, by the way, at the time there was no known in Europe. There were no democracies. So he wanted to show that democracy could be stable because people said, it can't be stable. I'll tell you why it can't be stable. Because in democracy, the people who are in the majority get their way and the others will just go home because they don't get their way. So he wanted to show that democracy could be stable. What example did he use? The Iroquois Confederacy, which at that time had existed for about 150 years and was quite stable. Okay. I mean, maybe I don't have to keep going down the list. I mean, is the Western tradition a non-oppressive? Are you kidding me? Western colonization is sort of the paradigmatic example of oppression, spreading oppression around the world. Has there ever been a more successful regime of oppression than the West? Oh, I'm getting really discouraged. Okay, well, you know, for those, you know, homework. What about rights for women? I'm too discouraged. I can't go. Okay. Now, but wait a minute. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I'm okay. We're saying, but aren't human rights a Western idea? And isn't there a problem with thinking about human rights as being universal? The American Anthropological Association thought so. The UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights was actually adopted in 1948, but they were working on it before that. So the American Anthropological Association found out about it and they said, uh-oh, big problem, universal human rights. What's the problem? Well, in 1947, they issued a statement identifying the problem. Now bear with me for a second, I just have to go find the statement, which will take. Here it is, October, December 1947. And what they're going to do is they're going to remind us of what happened in the past when people thought they had universal moral truths. I'm going to read it to you if you can't read it. I know. It says, in the history of Western Europe and America, however, economic expansion, control of armaments, and an evangelical religious tradition have translated the recognition of cultural differences into a summons to action. This has been emphasized by philosophical systems that have stressed absolutes in the realm of values and ends. Definitions of freedom, concepts of the nature of human rights and the like have thus been narrowly drawn. Alternatives have been decried and suppressed where controls have been established over non-European peoples. The hardcore of similarities between cultures has consistently been overlooked. What are the results of this? The consequences of this point of view have been disastrous for mankind. So what you're seeing is the consequences of believing in universal moral truths. And by the way, they did believe in universal moral truths. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the New World, they read a document to the natives. Do I know what it was? Oh, no. It was the Requerimiento. And by the way, before I tell you what it said, what language did they read it in? Latin, yeah. And here's what it said. We have been authorized, sent here by the Pope, who has been designated by God as ruler of the universe. Talk about universal values. And if you don't convert to Christianity, we will beat the heck out of you. Well, we'll do that anyway. Okay? Now, but it said, I translate sometimes because it's sort of offensive. It's actually said enslave and did all these really awful things. So I just said beat the heck because, sometimes I'm a little appalled at what they would, well, of course. Yeah, exactly. It was, now here's the thing. Does everybody see you couldn't have more universal values than ordained by God for the whole universe, okay? And look what happened. The American Anthropological Association, look what happened. Now I have to stand back here and... The consequences of this point of view have been disastrous for mankind. Doctrines of the white man's burden have been employed to implement economic exploitation and to deny the right to control their own affairs to millions of peoples over the world, where the expansion of Europe and America has not meant the literal extermination of whole populations. And by the way, it often meant the literal extermination of whole populations. Rationalized in terms of ascribing cultural inferiority to these peoples or in conceptions of their backwardness and development of their primitive mentality that justified their being held in the tutelage of their superiors, the history of the expansion of the Western world has been marked by demoralization of human personality and the disintegration of human rights among the peoples over whom hegemony has been established. Now, that's sort of a powerful statement, but how many people say that's true? How many people here say that's true, that that's the effect that they had? Okay. I'm going to raise my hand. What they did was really awful. The question for us is, was it the belief in universal moral norms or principles that was the problem? Okay? And the American Anthropological Association thought it was, because they go through and they use this. This is preamble to justify three things. If we had more times, I would give you all three. But the really bottom line is number 3, which I've highlighted. Standards and values are relative to the culture from which they derive, so that any attempt to formulate postulates that grow out of the beliefs or moral codes of one culture must to that extent detract from the applicability of any declaration of human rights to mankind as a whole. If the problem is universality of values, the solution is relativity. The solution is cultural relativity. And so they give, that's a statement of cultural, what's called cultural relativism. Standards and values are relative to the culture from which they derive. Now, you are about to have a philosophical moment. So get ready here, okay? You are about to have a philosophical moment. Can anybody explain to me why this statement is incompatible with what they said earlier? I wouldn't expect, but now I'm going to start, and you can pick it up at any time. Just a second. Now we're just going to. What they say are values are relative to the culture, right? Now, notice the Western Europeans had a cultural value of intolerance. So if the American Anthropological Association was consistent, they would have said, we have no basis for criticizing the colonization of the Americas because we have our values of tolerance, but they didn't have that value. They had a value of intolerance. The American Anthropological Association has got to go back and rewrite that document. But now, what we can see is this, and this is our philosophical moment. What they were implicitly arguing was the Western Europeans were moral imperialists, and moral imperialism is wrong. Now, this is it. We got to the philosophical moment. Can you be a cultural relativist and believe that moral imperialism is wrong? If you're a cultural relativist, what you'll believe is moral imperialism is wrong for cultures that have a norm against moral imperialism. Can you believe moral imperialism is wrong even for cultures that have a norm of moral imperialism? You can believe it, but you can't be a cultural relativist, because do you know what you've just done? You've just stated one universal moral norm. Just one. Moral imperialism is wrong. If you really mean it's wrong for all cultures, it's a universal. Oh, but now this is really puzzling, isn't it? The American Anthropological Association was implicitly committed to a universal moral norm. And yet they thought they were arguing for cultural relativism. Wow. Well, there's good news here, I'll tell you. The American Anthropological Association in 1999 came up with a different statement on human rights. Anthropology as a profession is committed to the promotion and protection of the right of people and peoples everywhere to the full realization of their humanity, which is to say their capacity for culture. When any culture or society denies or permits the denial of such opportunity to any of its own members or others, the American Anthropological Association has an ethical responsibility to protest and oppose such deprivation. This implies starting from the baseline of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Are you kidding me? They don't even think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights goes far enough. And associated implementing international legislation, but also expanding the definition of human rights to include areas not necessarily addressed by international law, and then going on. What happened? Generation. And the American Anthropological Association came to the realization that even they hadn't noticed it before, they were actually depending on their own conviction in certain universal moral norms in order to decry the treatment of indigenous peoples. And now their problem with the UN Universal Declaration is it doesn't go far enough. But still, there is a question here, which is that we have now the American Anthropological Association even believing in universal human rights. But in what sense? In what sense are they universal? So what we've just seen is that there's a deep puzzle about cultural relativism, which is that the arguments that people give for it are arguments roughly that assume that moral imperialism is wrong. And that means they're committed to at least one universal moral norm. And once they recognize that, and this happens, once they recognize it, they realize, oh, they're committed to more than one. And so now we go back, and one more time we have to make a try. How can we understand the universality of human rights? And I'm not going to say too much here, because all I want you to see is that to understand it, we have to go back and look at this historical process and say, what's going on in this process? And then what we see, and people have already made very helpful suggestions. One of the things that we're seeing is that the line between us and others is being found to be morally arbitrary. It's very much in, the self-interest of a white person to have slaves, and so it's in their self-interest to believe that slaves are not equal. But if it's possible to step back and look at it from an impartial point of view, and this is absolutely crucial because sometimes philosophers emphasize impartiality and they downplay, and to empathically identify. It absolutely crucially depends on your being able to have empathic identification with the other. And when you look at the development, if you look at the development, for example, that's why I was talking about the Salamanca School, of the idea of rights for the Indians, one of the main figures is Bartolomé de las Casas. Is anybody here familiar with that? So Bartolomé de las Casas, absolutely amazing guy, and he's almost sort of the first anthropologist of the Western Europeans. Why? Because he was interested in the natives. He thought he wanted to find out about their way of life, and the more he found out about it, the more respect he had for it. Whereas the others were not interested in them all. They would like their gold. They liked having them as slaves, the encomienda. That's the process. And the process depends on there being people who are able to step back and empathically identify with other groups. And interestingly enough, the process accelerates once you have democracies because you have more people who are able to do that and can exercise power. Yes?
It's easier to do that if you are the other.
Oh,
So,
but
for example, women are always empathically
yeah,
relating to the oppressive group in the case of men. And so it's, excuse me?
yeah.
Oh, come on. Speak up. Don't just mumble back there.
But no, excuse me. Yeah, please talk to me, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
But make him stop mumbling.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if I have to talk to you, you can stop mumbling.
No, I'm please, will you please, when she's talking to me, we have one person at a time.
So,
Yes, yes.
if you are the other, then you have to be able to empathize because you don't have the same moral rights, or you're definitely not, you're in a situation where someone else is defining things because you wouldn't be the other. If you were the one,
Right.
you would be defined.
And so that's right. It's an asymmetric situation, but it doesn't always depend on the others. I mean,
No,
sometimes
you
they
can't
they may not neither side has to be empathic,
Right. Either
but
side can be,
to
but it's
overcome it
easier
in a way, in a moral way, is going to require that. That's all I was saying. Yes.
People that are aggressively repressed often just identify with the aggressor, another side of the coin.
Oh, you can identify, I'm going to say, you can identify with lots of different people, right? But what's crucial is this, that what I'm saying is that it depends on having the ability to step back and identify with all the different positions. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
never mind.
Okay, so, and if you think of it that way, then it's a really interesting question how we're able, and by the way, when I say this, I sound really like a Pollyanna. It's like, oh, it's so you just step back, you know, something. It's an extreme accomplishment, right? It's a huge achievement. It happens over centuries sometimes, you know. But still, what's fascinating, you know it's happening because things that at one time seemed crazy come to see self-evident, you know? And so what you can, and there are two aspects to it. One is just to be able to identify with others, but there's actually more to it than that because there's also, when you make the identification, there's a recognition that, oh, each person, when they try to articulate these rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, what they're saying is each person should have the authority over their own lives to be able to decide the kind of life they're going to live. There are limits, and the limits are, you know, harming other people and things like that. But the ones that are problematic are the limits that are placed on them because either they're not fully human or, I mean, if you think of the position of women, the history of philosophy is most philosophers have thought women are not the equal of men, right? How did they know?
How did they know?
Yeah, in quotes, how did they know?
Because
Their livelihood and everything depends on keeping themselves in power.
That's
The technology allowed this happen.
that's a
When you're out there, you have to spend your whole time, your whole family has to work just to stay alive. You don't have the time to think about these things. You're too busy doing other things. The people that are in charge need to keep everybody else subservient for them to remain in power and for their whole life to be as they need it to be.
Sure.
I think of that as the Javert syndrome, named after Inspector Javert from Les Miserables, who needed to think that way. Anything else would destroy his world. So all these things were actually destroying other people's worlds when we're coming up with these morals.
right, but what we can see is we're not doomed to fail. That's all I'm saying. And so then you start to think, okay, again, we could take more time to think about what's involved in doing this, but now I want to just shift it to, once you see that this is a process of discovery, and the discoveries are startling discoveries of things that people would have thought were crazy, and you also see that it's a process of overcoming blind spots, and then you see, okay, we haven't overcome all our blind spots. Then really an interesting question is, what are examples? We've already talked about some examples, but actually, what are examples of the kinds of blind spots that we're still in the process of overcoming.
Animal rights,
Animal rights, that's an interesting one, isn't it? That's an interesting one.
they are the other, that's why we can do whatever, we can eat them, we can make them do this or that.
Yeah.
The question is
Just
whether
as
that's,
add
what?
on, I want to point out that, Darwin, in his discussion of evolution, talked about the evolution of sentiments and the passage of evolution of sentiments for beings that are very much like you, and then the evolution of that all the way down to the animal.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the suggestion was animal rights is one that we can actually see coming, and then this other commentator here pointed out that Darwin was already, when he's talking about evolution, he was also talking about evolution of sentiments and extending that kind of identification, right?
He went through the whole process with other tribes, other beings, other colors, so on, animals.
Yeah, yeah. So in other words, you see, once you see it, sometimes you can then see, oh yeah, interesting, I can see where it's going to go. But all I insist is, not Darwin, not anybody can see everywhere where it's going to go. You have to actually, it depends, the process itself, you have to get involved in the process, because if somebody could see where it was going to go, they could say, oh, well, look at, see, at least to me it's self-evident, I can see it, but it isn't true. And if we had time, we could talk about Darwin's blind spots too. Yes?
As you explore the moral discovery process of human rights, is there any utility to looking back on the institutionalization process of the suppression of human rights to learn anything about the forces that led to that we may not even recognize to be quite evident today?
Okay, and that ties in with the comment over here too, right? Is if I tell the historical story of the development of human rights, I'm suppressing temporarily the historical story of the suppression of human rights. And when you have developments of human rights, you will also have innovations in suppressing human rights.
You know, there seems to have been a lot of back and forth between those assertions of human rights and the suppression of them.
Yeah, and people, here's the thing, people can be quite creative about coming up with ways of violating people's rights in a way that is more invisible, right? The whole goal is to do it in a way that's not recognized as a violation of human rights. A classic example in the United States today is the mass incarceration of black males. It's not regarded as a problem of human rights. It's regarded as a problem of a certain culture or something like that. And when it's just, and see what I hear you saying is that actually there's institutionalization, but also what I think is really important is framing. You can frame something in a way that the moral aspects of it are invisible. And that's, you know, people are smart. They are really good at coming up with ways of framing things so that some of the morally important factors of it are invisible.
The easiest way to have that process of institutionalizing these suppressive tendencies is to support a hierarchical governance process that depends upon
fewer and fewer collaterals having anything to say about what really goes on and decisions that are made, and setting higher and higher and higher those people who have greater and greater power in hopes that they will protect us against the others. And the trade-off is giving away human rights.
And think about it, you can think about it this way too, right? I mean, if you just think of democracy as the right to vote, look at all the ways that creative people can come up with ways to dilute the effect of your vote. But really, when you think of democratic rights as a human right, you're thinking of it as the right of the people to influence the government, and sometimes they have to then go out and demonstrate and do something because their votes are not going to do it. Yeah, and the process is not one that you can even say right now, what's the best way of furthering them? But all I say is that having democratic rights is really helpful, because even then, to have a right to demonstrate, that's a huge innovation historically, right? Yes, you had a. Here, I'm going to give this to you.
All right. The thing that scares me, because I thought if we get enough people to vote for what we want, we get what we want. But it all boils down to your beginning Constitution. The Supreme Court is the deciding factor. They decide whether a man is a man who can vote or a corporation can. And they go back to the Second Amendment. And depending on their interpretation of that Second Amendment, they can interpret it from the times then or the times now. And how are we ever going to change that?
And every time anybody starts to get discouraged, I just have to remind you, the Dred Scott decision was overturned, right? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
The Supreme Court changes, but slowly. And there are only two strict constitutionists on the court now, I think. And this is Clarence Thomas and Scalia. I was just going to say, we've been talking about the issue of why are rights suppressed? And so we're talking about suppression of rights, Charlie was, but we haven't addressed the question of why rights are suppressed. And the gentleman over here, he was talking, just give me a minute. He was talking about economics. I want to suggest a different motivation. And the motivation that I would suggest has to do with an ingrained attempt on the part of individuals to gain status. And that's part of our genetic framework. And it's sort of one of the things you didn't mention that the conquistadors obtained was their moral satisfaction of bringing Catholicism to the Aztecs.
Sure.
And so the idea of slavery, I think, was built on status, the status seeking. If the North had been willing to buy all of the slaves in the South, so that the South was, in some sense, fully, quote, compensated, the South wouldn't have sold. They wouldn't have sold.
Yeah,
and so it's not just the economics. I want to stress the idea of status in explaining this. That's all.
Okay, good, yeah.
Brain, but it's hard to imagine universal rights as long as we don't recognize, where we come from, in our minds, the way we're built, and I'm going to say our left hemispheres, as a vertical hierarchy. As long as we're on the vertical hierarchy, everyone's going to fight over who deserves what, and just what you're saying, Dick, too. It's built in. It's now if we took the vertical and we turned it horizontal, right, and we put humans and animals and the land and the water and everything on that on an equal plane. Now, to me, you've got it. You've at least got the right foundation, for how you are me and I'm you, and our animals aren't less because we need them, and anyone who's not doing well on that horizontal plane is affecting the other, right? But we want to deny that, and I think we have over here recognizes that, but it's not dominant anymore.
So, so one thing that what we've already started to do is, although this is the ostensible topic is human rights, really once I tell the story of human, it doesn't stop with humans, right? The story doesn't stop with humans. It's just that if you take this one topic, you can see all the themes that are going to be for the whole extension. That's right, yeah. I'm going to walk to the back. I'll come back because I haven't heard from many people in the back, and I'm just wondering, is there anybody here who wanted to say something? Yeah, here, just a second. Oh, really? Okay. There you go.
Is it working? Okay. Quite a few people spoke about slavery, and I read recently that they changed the name. They were agricultural workers. But that's not my question. I wanted to know, we've all heard of the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, and some of you probably know people who received it. But uh, China has a different Peace Prize, um, and it was Confucius Peace Prize, and it was given to Mugabe, and I just want you to comment on that.
Well, here's a comment. Robert Mugabe is not a defender of human rights.
You can talk.
Yeah, I'll talk into this one. Do you want me to say?
When you talked about cultural relativism and Mugabe receiving that prize from China,
Yeah.
and how in the West, how we think about
That's right. Whenever we're talking about different cultures, we have to be very careful to not make assumptions based on ignorance. But to believe in universal human rights is to believe that there could be a culture that endorses slavery, and if so, they ought not to do it. Now, how can you believe in universal human rights and not be a moral imperialist? You can believe, or I'll give you another example, female genital cutting. Female genital cutting, which, as you know, is quite widespread still in the world. You can believe that it should not be practiced, but you can also say, but I don't endorse going in and forcing them to stop. So this is an interesting question. So I'll take that example because the reason it's such an interesting example to me is because I think you can actually see the difference between a bottom-up and a top-down approach to human rights. A top-down approach to human rights is you say, oh, look, there's this practice, female genital cutting. We should make it illegal and we should punish people who do it. But actually, the people who do it it's typically, I'm thinking of Senegal, which is, I'm going to tell you about Tostan. It's the mothers who have their daughters cut, and the cutters are typically other women in the family. When you understand why they do it from the inside, you can see why, yes, you would want your daughter cut so that she not be a pariah. That doesn't mean you endorse female genital cutting. It means that if it's going to change, it should change from the inside. So I want to tell you about an organization called Tostan. Tostan means breakthrough in Wolof, which is the indigenous language in Senegal. And it's an educational organization. It was started in the 1970s by Molly Melching, who'd been a Peace Corps volunteer. It's the organization goes into a village when they're invited in, and they have lots of educational resources. But the first thing that they teach the villagers about is human rights. And they learn about human rights documents. Often they're illiterate, so they can't read them, but they discuss them. This is really empowering. They actually come to think of themselves as having certain rights. And then the villagers are asked, what other modules are you interested in? And so there are some that are very popular that, for example, sanitation, water purity, all these things are absolutely crucial. Also, fertilizers, these are all absolutely crucial things. And so they learn about that. And they then start getting interested in learning about different medical treatments and so on. Tostan is not an I'll call it FGC, female genital cutting, so I can say it briefly. It's not an anti-FGC organization. As a matter of fact, Molly Tostan was just here a week, Molly Melching, the founder, was just here a week ago, and she was telling the story. It was about 1997 that for the first time a village made a declaration that they were going to end female genital cutting. She was surprised. But what they found out was that an individual can't end it because then their daughters would be unmarriageable. Even a village couldn't end it because they intermarried with other villages. So when that village declared they were going to end female genital cutting, the other villages said, we won't marry your daughters. So actually what it took was whole collections of villages that were intermarrying, and now in the most recent, in a month, they're going to have the next group declaration, 97 villages. And it's not an anti-FGC organization. These declarations have ended female genital cutting, they've ended child marriage, they've ended domestic abuse against wives, they've ended all sorts of different things, and not by making them illegal. In 1996, Senegal made female genital cutting illegal. It had zero effect, zero. But now over half of the villages in Senegal have declared an end to female genital cutting, and within about 5 years, it'll be the whole country. And it's due to the work of Tostan. And Tostan has now been in, and it's always by invitation. They're not going in and telling anybody anything. They go in and they listen. And now they're in 5 or 6 other African countries. And it's a model for ending female genital cutting everywhere. And it's a respectful model. Do you see? They go in and they say, okay, we teach you about human rights, so you say you have human rights. But then we ask you, what do you want to learn? What do you want to talk about? And by the way, once you take our course, you realize then you have a responsibility to be a resource for other people who can't take it. Yes?
I was in the Peace Corps too.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the other women teachers asked me was, do you have to give all your money to your husband when you teach? Or do you get to use your money as
Oh, yeah.
And, there were discussions, and I do believe that it has to come from the people themselves. They ask the questions, you tell them, how you work it out.
Yeah.
And they eventually figure it out for themselves because they're not illiterate. They may not read English, but some of them are the brightest. I taught those
Oh, sure.
students.
Illiterate just means not reading,
Yeah.
not bright.
But
Yes.
some of the brightest people I've ever met in the whole world.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Now, I'm going to come back over to you, but have you noticed I'm now actually, since we're getting close to the end, I'm consciously trying to include others in the discussion if they want to be included. Yeah, I'll be back, so I'll be back. But yes.
Until women achieve the equality of men, only then will we really be able to talk about human rights.
But we got to talk about them so that we can help them achieve the equality, right? But you're saying you won't say that we actually respect them until they've achieved equality.
Until the women have the same rights as the men, the equality of these two feet, we're just not going to make it any further down the road.
Okay, well, then all I would say is that that's a really important step to take. But even if we haven't achieved that one, to have a right to same-sex marriage is also important, isn't it? So there are lots of them. Just a second, you can tell what I'm doing now. I'm walking around and I'm looking for people who haven't said anything yet, because I'm thinking maybe you just don't want to, but in case you're feeling, oh, he just keeps talking to those same people and I want to say something, I thought I should walk around and give you a chance. Yeah, I know, but anybody else have anything that they want to say? On equal rights for women? Yeah, but then okay, I'll put you on the list, but you see what I'm doing, don't you? You see what I'm doing, okay? Now, if I put you on the list, then you have been very patient. So here.
We've already gone way past where I was.
Oh, we've gone,
Yes.
okay, so you're okay? Okay, you had your hand up, did you? Yeah, okay, and then you're next, okay.
I'll make it short, but there are 3 things. When you talk about equal rights, you have to say equal rights for all people. As soon as you say equal rights for this one group, it's not equal anymore. Next thing, if you're concerned about our own human rights, pay attention to what's happening with technology. We're having more and more surveillance. As it's been well documented, when you know you're being surveilled, you better watch what you say and what you do. And technology is getting better and better and better all the time. People walk around with their trackers. They advertise to everybody their every movement. It's all being watched. And one other thing to think about is property. When you talk about human rights or whatnot, or whatever it is, there's the whole concept of mine or ours. And it's because we all have a certain point where it's, I have to take care of my family, my tribe, my country, or does that come first or over taking care of everybody? And the whole concept of property.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, now you had a reply?
My reply was that I was fortunate to marry a man who believed that I was equal to him.
Right.
And he, in those early days, said, you have your own bank account, you have your own money. I still take care of the family, whatever you need, I give you. But he trained me to realize that the only way you get your rights is to ask for them, because there are a lot of men out there who are more than willing to realize that women and men are equal.
Okay.
And I've tried to bring up my children that way. And I think it's a process of learning. We can't say women will ever get their rights until they start asking for them or expecting them.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, well, here, now it's time to end, so I want to end on this note. I was fortunate enough to marry a woman who is superior to me, but she treats me as an equal, so thank you.